and welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week I am joined by Doron Keren to speak about his grandfather Ignacy Chiger's book, Beneath the Lightless Sky, Surviving the Holocaust in the Sewers of Lvov, a survival story of a family of four who sought shelter in the sewers during the Nazi occupation of Poland. Before we get into this conversation, I do want to let you know that some of the topics discussed may be uncomfortable for some listeners. Within this episode, we discuss murder, torture, and death, including that of an infant. With that, let's get into the conversation.
Recording in progress.
Hi, Madison.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, and I can hear you.
Great.
Awesome. All right. How are you doing this morning?
Good. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good.
How is frozen Tampa?
Oh, it was very cold. I was in a wedding on Sunday. That was, the ceremony was outside and it was an indoor-outdoor reception. It was very, very cold. Very cold.
You had to put on things that you normally don't do, which is probably layers of
Yes.
clothing.
Yes, I think I've used every jacket that I own in the last week.
That's funny.
Yes. No, it was definitely very cold this weekend.
So I'm happy to be on your. I'm honored to be on your podcast, I
Oh,
should
thank you.
say. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming on. I'm very excited to have this conversation.
So, are we? I guess it's recorded. We're going. We're
Yep, so
live.
I have it recording. I'm gonna do like an official start to it. And then we'll go through and then I'll do like there'll be an end, and then if there's anything afterwards that if you have any questions or we can go over.
Okay.
But I will be editing it and putting it out for tomorrow. So quick turnaround for this one.
Right.
And then before we get started, if you can, I know you sent me the pronunciation for your name, but if you can say it yourself just so that I can hear it, because sometimes that's a little bit easier
Daron.
for me. Can you say it one more time?
Daron.
Daron. Okay, that's what I was saying to myself, and I was like, let me just make sure that it's
Now that I'm doing this,
uh-huh.
that I'm becoming somewhat of a celebrity adjacent type of person. I want to make sure that if and there's a funny story to this too. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV series Fauda
I have not.
on. So Fauda is a series done, many years ago about the Israeli I like special units that were infiltrating Hamas, and you and one of the actors, his acting name was Doron. It's a very popular Israeli name.
Mhm.
So it took 57 years for people to pronounce my name correctly, because once they saw that, they're like, "Oh, Doron, Doron, Doron."
And your last name, it's Karen.
Karen is the last name,
Okay, just wanted
but
to make sure.
and my old family name, my grandfather's original, surname is pronounced Heger.
Heger.
So CH is a silent C.
Okay. All right. Do you have any questions before we get started, or are you good to go?
I think we're good to go. I think
All
we're
right.
let's roll. Let's
Okay.
unpack this.
Okay. So, welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am joined today by Doron. Oh my God, I totally just messed up. Hello, welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am joined today by Doron Keren to talk about. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I am just not with it this morning. I totally want to get the name of the book right, and I have like 3 different emails.
Beneath the
Beneath
Lightless Sky
Beneath the Lightless Sky. Okay.
by Ignacy Chiger.
Ignacy Chiger. Okay. I am joined by Doron Keren to talk about his grandfather's book, Beneath the Lightless Sky by Ignacy Chiger. Doron, if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Sure. First, I want to Thank you, Madison, for inviting me on your podcast. It's an honor to be here. I am the grandchild, the grandson of Ignacy Chiger. Ignacy Chiger orchestrated an escape during the Holocaust. Um, his family was living in the sewers of Lvov for 14 months. So when the war broke out in 1939, first the people don't really, some people don't really understand the history of what happened during that time. So uh, before the war broke out, you had uh, a pact. It's called uh, a pact between Germany and the Soviet Union, or the Russia, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and they essentially divided Poland in half. You had the eastern half, which was the German half, and I'm sorry, the western half was the German half, and the eastern half was the Soviet. Lvov, which is the city that my uh, family grew up in, on my mother's side, uh, happened to be on the Soviet side, and that city today is called Lviv, is part of Ukraine. Then it was Lvov, Poland. So the Russians came in, and 2 years later, after the Russian occupation, the Germany broke the pact and rolled past the Russians and took over the rest of Poland on their way to Russia. So my family went through, especially my grandfather, went through a horrific journey for several years, first under the Soviets and then under the Germans. Under the Soviets, it was more of a psychological torture. Under the Germans, it was physical torture and murder, annihilation. When it was, I'll say this, the Germans used to have certain what they call actions, essentially scheduled killings of thousands of Jews in the ghetto that was formed at the time. During a period where the Jews sensed that the final action was going to occur, my grandfather orchestrated a plan to dig through the barracks of the basement of barracks, situated near the sewer system. So him and a couple of other people that he trusted, they dug 22 feet through and hit the sewer tunnel dead on. Now you have to imagine what the main sewer system was like, the main pipe. You had maybe a 6 to 8 foot river, essentially, with a large vaulting over it, and you had two sidewalks, narrow sidewalks on either side. Now, if you dug and then you hit this vaulting too high, you're essentially falling into the river, and that would be the end of you. So they had to really, really hit the right spot so they'd landed on the sidewalk. That was an amazing feat to begin with. Just digging it, you're getting rid of the dirt and digging through concrete and nailing it dead on. People wonder, well, how is this done? How did this? How could I was shocked to figure out, to understand, like, how did he know? Like, of course, reading the book, he tells you that
Yes.
it wasn't just luck or chance. He used to sit on a hill overlooking what then it was called the Peltver River. after World War One, and he watched Italian prisoners build this sewer tunnel and essentially build part of the city on top of this river. So this is an exposed sewer system, and now it's buried underground. Um, so he remembered, decades later, that there was a certain building that was built close to the sewer system, and he figured that if I dug through the basement of that building at a certain angle, I could hit it. And that's what happened. So um, they spent, no one knew that it was going to last 14 months. There were 20 people that went down into the sewer with my family. 10 ultimately came out. And then there's a long story to what life was like in the sewer for 14 months.
Yes, I'm reading through your grandfather's story, even starting from the beginning when during like the Soviet rule in his area of Poland, and just how it happens kind of slowly over time, and things just change for the worse as the years keep going, until he does ultimately make the decision that they need to get out of there and they need somewhere else to go, because they got out of there in like the nick of time. Like it was like the day that they left, that would have been not a great day if they had stayed.
Well, in the book, he also describes there was one person that uh, was the head SS
Mm-hmm.
officer in charge of the ghetto, and he was a main character, one of the most evil villains anyone could ever read about. You can only imagine it would be kind of like out of a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
He personally wanted to. He had great respect for my grandfather. He hated him, and yet he was very useful to him.
Yes.
That was one of the amazing parts of the book as well. The relationships with the Soviet leader of then what was called the NKVD, today's KGB, and following him came a psychopathic killer uh, for the Germans. So he told the story that this man wanted to hunt down and kill my grandfather himself because he didn't trust anyone else to do it. He knew how elusive my grandfather could be and how smart he was. And so he wanted to make sure that he did it with his own hands. Um, so imagine imagine one day in, let's say, I guess it was, in 1939, you had a nice business, everything was well. He describes how life was before the war, how this was a Renaissance city. It was uh, a city like Vienna, for instance, you know, um, and beautiful fountains and just gorgeous, gorgeous city. And they had a business. He was a textile merchant. It was a family business, and they did quite well. Uh, Imagine, for your listeners, if you walk into your business one day and there are soldiers there, and they ask you, or they tell you, to hand over your keys, that you no longer own this business because you are part of the bourgeois, and this is the people's business now.
Yeah.
This is government business. You have nothing. You have nothing that you can do about it. Guns are pointed at you. You have no way of defending yourself, and so you capitulate. And by the way, the employees that have worked for you for years, um, those employees weren't Jewish, and they worked for you, and you had great relationships with them. In fact, they came to your house for dinner. Imagine that all of a sudden they turn on you and they call you out. And now you suddenly realize what they must have felt for all these years. Like, even though you thought you had a good relationship, you were the owner and they were the people who worked for you. And whether you were kind or not, it didn't matter. Um, the people thought that the Russians that came in, the Soviets, um, they came in promising paradise. They came in, you know, with freedom from the greedy capitalists. And my grandfather writes that, they came in as liberators and they liberated them from all of their possessions. That's that's how it was. And you couldn't trust anybody because there were spies everywhere. Uh, People became paranoid. Also, imagine that right after losing your business, you go home and there are strangers living in your house. Now your nice home is reduced to maybe 500 square feet and you sharing everything. Well, that's how things were. And now you say that it kind of happened over time, but in actuality, things happen really quickly if you think
Originally,
about it.
very quickly, yes.
The society devolved, and you had. Here's the interesting thing. During that time, you had this. When you read it, you think, my goodness, that kind of sounds a lot like what might be happening today with people embracing like the democratic socialists of America, let's say. Where we have literally a socialist mayor in New York, and how rich people in New York City embrace this, as well as people who are very, very modest means, because they thought that, well, for the people who don't have much, to them it was a way of saying, let's you know even the playing field. Now we're going to have what we didn't have before. But as my grandfather writes, there were many wealthy, young, Jewish, bored people who just kind of needed a cause to get behind. They felt, this was like very fashionable to demonstrate and to march in the streets. And so they also got behind the Soviet propaganda. And there's a term for the people like that, and they're called useful idiots. And it's true today, what's happening today. And until they weren't useful anymore. And then they realized what true communism was like. Now, they thought, well, we're gonna have all these things. I mean, they're promising us this paradise. What the Soviets really did was they took everything from Lvov and shipped it into the Soviet Union. So now everyone was equally miserable.
I remember reading one part about I believe it was in the paper factory, possibly with the machines that they had just got and the Soviets shipped them back to the Soviet Union and copied it piece for piece, and then shipped back. I think it was the copies back
The
to
copies.
the paper factory, just so that they could have the originals in the Soviet Union, with no regard for copyright or patents.
And yeah, I'm going to also reminded me of that reminded me of what my grandfather wrote about when he went to a paper factory, or the newspaper factory, and he it was like a metaphor of what happened to human beings. So he talks about how he sees this just raw, um, I don't know what created it, just wood and chips and this and all kinds of products, and it goes through this sophisticated machine and comes out newspaper with that to be printed on. And he said, well, under the Soviet rule, it's the exact opposite. A human being goes into a machine and comes out unrecognizable.
Yeah. Yes, the section of the book where he's talking about the paper factory and then him having to acquire paper from various means so that he could have the paper for his boss at the time. That was definitely an interesting part where where he was making decisions that he probably wouldn't have made in the past, but because of the current circumstances, he was having to do things that he probably wouldn't do during prior to the Soviet rule.
Well, he worked. I mean, he was under
He did work, yeah.
employment, I guess, if you want to call it that. Had no choice uh, he, for a tyrannical monster who, under the Soviet regime, communism, if you wanted to thrive through communism, it was all black market and bribery. That was the way to do things. So he became very adept at procuring goods like the paper, like anything else, and because he was a procurer of goods to begin with in his real occupation at his store. So he knew a lot of people. He knew where to get things, and so he used his skill set to navigate around this monster and do his bidding. Now, of course, some of the bidding was way he had to do things he really didn't want to do and shake down people in ways just so he can acquire the products for this man. And that's it's an unfortunate way of doing business, but he had no choice. He really didn't.
Yeah. Because as he tells his story and he goes from the Soviet rule to when the Germans were in charge, when he was doing all those various tasks for the man who was in charge of his village, the ghetto. And there's towards the end he talks about having to renovate a house in like 3 days or some impossible amount of time. He manages to get all these people together to do the work so that they can keep going another day.
So imagine having someone who, can kill you at any moment, and did kill thousands of people, relished in it.
Mm-hmm.
This was like it was. I mean, there was not enough blood that could satiate. His name was Joseph Grzemik, Hauptstandführer Joseph Grzemik, the SS commander of the ghetto during the Nazi occupation of Lvov. Now, again, my grandfather made himself important, so he did it for the Russian comrade who ran the NKVD in Lvov, and now he's doing it again. And Grzemik played this like sick cat and mouse game with him, and he put him through tests to see how far he could push him if he can get these tasks done on time. That was his game. Now, if he couldn't get them done on time, well, that was the end of him. But somehow my grandfather managed to finish these seemingly impossible tasks. One of them, before the house was renovated, he asked them to build a kitchen. Remember that scene when I want a kitchen built, a working kitchen with a dining hall. So, and I want to entertain. I want to bring my fellow Nazis and entertain them. So I think that was about a 24-hour turnaround time to get that done. So, my grandfather knew many people in the trades, and, they successfully somehow built a working kitchen, served food in a complete the dining hall when Jemek asked his fellow Nazis, "Now, how long do you think it took to build something like this?" And they responded, it'd probably be like a couple of months to do this. He goes, 24 hours. That's what my Jews did. That's what I got them to do. So this was, and then the finale was restoring that house at the edge of the ghetto when they had uh, just a few days to renovate an entire house. And there were a couple of really, really shocking Quentin Tarantino-esque scenes. I when they After a few days, when the tradesmen, the workers were exhausted, and the sun came out, and they just sat down for a couple of minutes and put their faces to the sun, just to relax and enjoy the sun in their face. And unfortunately, Joseph Jemek came by and saw them sitting and put the rifle, but the barrel of the rifle on my grandfather's shoulder, and he had a automatic machine gun, and killed them all right there on the spot, just for resting, because they weren't working. And then when the deadline was up, and he came to the house and he saw my grandfather applying varnish to the banister, and he puts his hand on the banister, and he looks at his hand and he goes, "Well, this is wet. It's not." He goes, and my grandfather said, "Well, all that has to happen is that you have to just let the varnish dry, and we're done. The house is complete." He said, "Nope, you didn't finish on time." So he had his henchmen take him to the gallows, along with a cobbler who made shoes for Jemek. They were just a little bit too tight. I think that's probably worthy of a hanging, don't you?
Definitely. That is just the things that they deemed murder worthy were, I mean, just being alive was something that they could murder you for.
But it was beyond even murder. I mean, he toyed with him,
torture.
constantly tortured him and toyed with him. And when the noose was around his neck, and just before my grandfather was about to pass out, he whispered in his ear, "I'll let you live another day." I mean, what kind of person does this to another human being? This is what he did. And that's when he decided that we've got to get the hell out of here somehow. We can't do this anymore. And he came up with the idea of digging into the sewer.
Yes. Do you wanna talk about their time in the sewer?
Absolutely. So my the difference between we didn't talk about my mother's book at all, and that book is called The Girl in the Green Sweater. The difference between that book, which actually came out before my grandfather's book was published, that book was first published in 2008 and led to the movie feature film called In Darkness, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. So now with this book, I'm kind of bookending the family story. The difference was that my mother's book was mostly about the sewer. And with my grandfather's, it's maybe 20 or 30%, because he talks about his time during the Soviet occupation and then the German occupation. And it makes sense because my mother was 4 to 7 years old, and in the beginning, and then later in the sewer, she was her memory is really, because she was a young girl, her memory was about hiding in the apartments. She wasn't venturing outside. She wasn't working like my grandfather. My grandfather had to keep them alive, had to keep them hidden, and also had to provide for his family. So he recalls things more so from the ghetto perspective, and hers is from the sewer. And many of the same events. It's remarkable how you have a child's perspective on things, and then you have an adult, a parent's perspective. So they make a decision that they're going to dig into the sewer. They hit the sewer. The men come out of where the opening in the sewer, and suddenly someone comes and finds them. Now they thought that that was it. They were dead. It turned out that a sewer worker and his co-workers came upon them. Shockingly, they found people that shouldn't be there. And my grandfather, being very quick-witted, struck a deal with this gentleman. His name was Leopold Socha. And this was a financial transaction. He said, I have a certain amount of money that I'll give you to keep us alive. Find us a spot that we could stay in the sewer. I mean, imagine that.
Yeah.
And, bring us, food, and we'll pay you for it. So they agreed. And no one knew that they were going to be there for 14 months. I mean, they thought maybe, weeks, a couple of months, maybe tops, but 14 months. Never seeing daylight, never breathing fresh air, in constant danger. You had floods, fires, and the most interesting part, and this is why I'm going to veer off for a second and tell you that I'm also working on a TV series based on both like my mother's perspective and my grandfather's perspective. Again, one event, two perspectives. But the sewer part, you have a very dark, disgusting place, a hellhole. And yet you have a fight for power. You have people that are, struggling to survive, that need to cooperate, that need to work together. And there's a fight for power. My grandfather was the leader, and, there was another man that was, that wanted to be leader, essentially. And then the different personalities of the people who were there. You had incredible events. And one woman that was part of this group went down. And of course, when you go down into the sewer, you're not taking luggage with you. Everything you own is on your back. You're wearing everything. And she wore a very big coat. And she was hiding the fact that she was pregnant. And ultimately, she gave birth because, it was time.
Yeah.
And what you would imagine being a joyous occasion was almost like their nightmare, because the crying baby would give everyone away, and then they would be killed. So she decided to take her own baby's life. And it's tragic. I mean, it really is. There was so many events that happened down there. My grandfather, to feel human, to feel like they were human beings, he wrote plays. Yeah, he wrote, there were satirical plays, and he wrote poems, and they recited them, and they also celebrated the holidays. They lit candles. The sewer workers brought them candles. and just to have some sense of humanity in a horrible, horrible place. They lived, their friends were, I should say friends, but they lived amongst rats, thousands of rats. And they would fight to preserve the food so the rats wouldn't get to them. But they lost every time. They just couldn't keep these creatures away because they were very, very smart. As a matter of fact, he describes in one scene um, that my uncle, the youngest survivor there, um, 4 years old, 5 years old, he was sick, and the sewer workers decided to bring him eggs so that he could, drink like raw eggs to make his throat feel better. Um, they kept the eggs up on a shelf, and they noticed that one of the rats tried to take the egg. But of course, this is not something that a rat can handle. You can't grab the egg and walk on, with 2 feet and then walk on the other 2 feet. So couldn't move the egg. Suddenly, the rat put the egg on its belly and laid on its back, and another rat was pulling on the rat's tail to take the egg. And they thought, like, this is incredible. They're like in anthropology 101, just watching the
Just the
genius
power of
of these
observation.
creatures. And it was almost entertainment for them. So they let him have the egg. um, the I have to talk about, when we talk about the sewer, I really have to talk about the savior. Now, you're someone who comes from the lowest station in life. Leopold Socha was a common thief. He was in and out of jail for most of his life, and he was a sewer worker. But he was also a devout Catholic, and being very pious. He watched my family, and especially my grandmother, who wasn't very religious, but she wanted to light the candles on Sabbath. And he grew attached to my family, so much so that when the money ran out, and eventually it ran out, because,
They were there for a long time.
they were there for a long time, he decided, um, the other workers didn't want to do it, but he decided that he would carry it to the end. See this through the end. Why? Because to him, this was redemption for all his sins. And if he saves this family, if he saves this group of 10 people, then this was his way of getting it to heaven. And I'll tell you something else. And I don't think this is really not in the book, but this is how my grandmother felt the day she died. She thought this man, Leopold Socha, was an angel sent from heaven. I'm going to give you goosebumps now. So, like an angel, he shows up out of nowhere when they first break into the sewer. There he is, and then he saves them because he was, this was a redemption for him. And a year later, he was killed, run over by, after he saved them, after this ordeal was over, a year later, tragically, he was run over by a car. And his body lay over a sewer manhole, and his blood ran into the sewer. So my grandmother swore that he was an angel sent from heaven, because he appears out of nowhere, and when his job was done, God took him up to heaven.
Yeah.
And
He the happenstance of him coming upon your grandfather's group and willing to help them, and even going past when the money ran out, that was something that he didn't need to do, but he still did it. for his redemption for humanity.
He also put a gun to his wife's head because his wife wanted to give him up. And this was such an important thing for him. And it became his second family. They became his second family.
Yeah, from reading through your grandfather's story, it seems like that him and the other worker, they did seem to like spend time with them while they were down there, like sitting with them and talking, going over stuff that's happening above ground. So over 14 months, I can see how that relationship would have grew and become something more than just someone helping someone else.
They spent quite a lot of time with them. I mean, they were the only source of information to what was happening. He brought my grandfather newspapers, and so again, he could read about what was going on. And up top, and he often sat with my mother on his lap. My mother loved and by the way, my mother's still alive,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't speak as much as she used to, but she is involved. Um, and I'll get to that in a second. But she, uh, at one point, got very melancholy. She became very, very depressed as during in the sewer. She stopped speaking, and he took her to a place where he could just open the manhole slightly and let her breathe in some air and see this, let her see that there's light outside. And that brought her back, and that helped her so much. He was a second father to her. She says so today, loves the man. Now, when the movie In Darkness came out, there's a whole backstory to that. But in post-production, she was asked if she liked everything, if it was all good, if it was true. Um, I'm gonna take a step back because that may be a little confusing. So many years ago, this first story came to light back in like in 1988. There was a BBC production, a documentary. Back then, there were 4 survivors, so they were all interviewed. The Margulises, my grandmother, and my mother, 4 remaining survivors. And from that came a book uh, uh, by the name of in the Sewers of Lvov, and it was written by a fellow named Robert Marshall. Um, Robert Marshall and my mother, had an agreement, and years later, he optioned the book, but and was paid royalty for that. But he didn't tell my mother anything about that. So when Agnieszka Holland, the director and the producer, found out, it was shocking to them. How do they find out? They asked Robert Marshall if there were any living survivors. Was anyone left? And he said no, knowing my mother was still there. And only at the very end of the production did Agnieszka and Holland find out that my mother was alive. And so they met, and the producer and director were just like livid. But how could you let this go? You don't mention that there's somebody who's still alive that can verify everything. And they asked my mother if there's anything about this story that you don't think is right or should be. He goes, I'll scrap the whole thing and start all over again. That's how upset they were. And now the story really is dedicated to Leopold Socha, the righteous, as we call the righteous Gentile. It revolved all around him. He was the lead. And my grandfather got somewhat of a diminutive role. Uh, and I was kind of, I wasn't too thrilled with that. But she said, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay because he was like my second father, and absolutely make this a tribute to him." And so it was. And it was, uh, I think, one of the highest grossing movies ever in Poland at the time in 2011. And again, it was nominated for an Academy Award. So I can't say enough about who this man was, his character. My grandfather gives him a spectacular tribute, and he to be so brave and come from such a place, you from and carry out such an incredible feat at risking your own life and life of your family. I can't say enough about who this person was and the character that he had. I forgot what the question was.
um, you were talking about your mother's book and the film that came out of that
Right,
one.
right. So that's the in essence the In Darkness. It was inspired by my mother's book. That's how that came about. Um, and uh, th- you know, growing up um, as a child of survivors, right? So both. I don't know if you knew this, but both my parents were survivors. My father has a different story. That's going to be another book, hopefully one day. Uh, so I grew up in a family of survivors. Like everybody knew in my family were survivors. It when you're growing up as a little kid, you really don't notice too much. But as I started to get a little older, I kind of knew that there was a difference between my parents and uh, other households, other parents. The refrigerator was always full of leftovers that should have been thrown out a long time ago. They're well past their expiration date. And I was always told, and I had to finish everything on my plate. And to this day, I do that. I leave nothing behind. And I think that, kind of trauma is carried over from generations. I mean, obviously, my trauma is not the trauma that they went through, but the things that I do today, I look back and I'm like a Boy Scout. I'm prepared for everything. I When I park the car, I back into the spot. When I sit in the restaurant, I sit facing the front door. Uh, and I always tell my kids, you've got to, look up, be alert, head on a swivel. You know, if you're going to text in the subway, make sure your back is against the wall. So I think it was just it became innate for me to be like that, and that could be carried over from what they had to go through and how they had to be mindful of everything, and especially preserving food because they didn't know when they were going to eat again. So it was really important to finish everything in your plate.
Yeah, it's your upbringing is a sort of a reflection of what happened in your mother's childhood, having experiencing the food insecurity, and then having to go to making sure that nothing goes to waste. That's something, especially something that like people whose grandparents were alive during like the Great Depression. I have my family is all different ages, so some of the like the older cousins, their grandparents that are different from my grandparents, they experienced the food insecurity of that time, and they did the same thing. The food is always still kept a little bit past when it's supposed to be around, and things just don't get thrown away because you never know if you'll need it.
It's so true. It really is. Um, you know, when I was young, living at home with my parents, as a tween, let's say. I my parents spoke about their survival, but and which is kind of unusual because many survivors did not talk about it. They didn't want to. And in my mother's book, she talks about that when they moved from Poland to Israel in 1956, when Poland opened its immigration migration to for Jews to anywhere they wanted to go. Uh, Everybody that came from from Europe, every single person that arrived in Israel, imagine that, every single one was a survivor. It's not like they weren't born there. They just, and so everyone had a story, and no story is better than the next. Everyone survived, and they didn't want to talk about it. They wanted to just move forward. They're like, okay, we lived through this, we made it. Now let's move forward. Now let's build a life. Let's build a country. And that's what they decided to do. So when, but when my parents moved to the U.S. in 68, 1968, that is.
Yeah.
I started to hear bits and pieces, but there was no chronological order. It was just, oh, this happened to us, and this happened to us, and this, and this, and this. It really wasn't until I read my mother's book that I understood the story from start to finish. I was like, wow, why didn't I know this before? I mean, I knew this event and that event and this event, so I'm very familiar with it, but I just didn't know it chronologically. When my mother wrote her book with co-writer, ghostwriter Dan Paisner, he told me that there were papers all over the room, and that was my grandfather's original manuscript. Of course, it's written in Polish, so he couldn't decipher it. So she would pick out parts of his manuscript. That manuscript is this book, and Beneath the Lightless Sky. Now, I was just, again, shocked that for the first time I had read this. I knew her story from beginning to end, the survival story. So, again, growing up, it was like, this is like crazy little thing, and this, and I also, looking back on it as an adult, and as a child, I don't think you really understand what's going on. There are certain sounds that affected my mother, like a thump. Eventually, she told me that sound triggered her memory of when mothers would come home to find their children gone, and they would throw themselves off of the roof of their buildings. And that sound is their bodies hitting the pavement. And that happened a lot.
Yeah.
And that stuck with her. That's really, that triggers her. The sound of rushing water really triggers her, because that's when the floods came through the sewers. And it was up to her neck. And my grandfather had to hold up both children up the ceiling of the sewer pipe. But miraculously, it never took them and killed them. So all these little miracles, all these little things, just I don't know. Sometimes I'm not really a religious person, but is it divine intervention? I mean, you read through his book, and the part where they were still in the ghetto, and they went to see a psychic, and the psychic, there were several people, including family members and others. Then they asked the question, who would survive the war? And he pointed to two people, my grandmother and my grandfather. And they survived. In fact, I'm gonna give you some incredible statistics. My son and I, we decided to what are the odds of our family, that one family surviving? And you know, from his book, he writes that there was 150,000 Jews that
Yes.
lived in Lvov before the war. 260 people survived from 150,000. Of the 260 people, there was only one family with two kids that survived, and that's my family. So we created this odds funnel, and uh, through AI, this pulls it from all records.
Mm-hmm.
So the odds of a someone who is Jewish to survive in Poland was only 10%, the borders of Poland at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The odds of surviving Auschwitz was 12%. The odds of a family of four surviving in Lvov was 0.016%. That's 1 out of 6,250.
That's crazy.
Is it divine intervention? I mean, and then the story of Soha, the angel. I mean, there's got to be something to that. There just has to be. And, I retired a few years ago. I was a dentist, full-time and a half, constantly working.
Mm-hmm.
And, I retired I was sick, so I had to retire. But I just didn't want to sit around and do nothing. That's not me. I'm always moving.
Mm-hmm.
So I happened upon the Polish edition of my grandfather's book. And then then I had the translation in front of me. And when I read the translation, I knew my purpose. I knew I had to tell this story because this is something that, he put down, and he wrote this down to be told, not to be preserved in some, library someplace that nobody could access. And I found my purpose, and especially after October 7th, I felt a calling, a sense of duty. And I'm not kidding. I really did.
Mm-hmm.
And I first started my journey to get this story out. I wanted to create and develop a TV series because I thought that, well, this is the best way of the most eyeballs I can get
to see the story.
to know this story. And it's such an incredible, set of events that only can be told in a series format.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was working with my screenwriter, his name is Charles Kipps, and he said to me that really the best way to get a series done these days is, to option a book. And so you got to get this book published. And so I did. I went that route, and I sent it to a publisher within about a week's time. She turned around and said, "I'm going to publish a book. This is an incredible story." And everybody that I've come, like you read yourself, you're like, "Wow."
Mm-hmm. It's something. It's a story that I haven't read before. I have read quite a few like World War II kind of memoir-esque books about stories of survival, and this one is definitely different. It's not too many that I have read are from from anyone who's lived in Poland. A lot of them are like more Germany, more like the country of Germany-esque survival stories, and this is something that I think is that will be a good addition for people who have read other stories of survival to have this specific story of survival in their repertoire of reading.
I mean, just let's picture ourselves walking across the street, and let's say you're walking over a manhole cover. Can you imagine that there would be people living there underneath your feet for 14 months? I mean, So, and here's the thing, my mother would say that it it wasn't the people that survived weren't necessarily the smartest or the strongest. They were the most adaptable,
Hmm.
those who can adapt to their surroundings. Now, I said that 20 people went down into the sewer. Uh, Many of them couldn't take it and they left and were killed. Some died in the sewer. So both a sanctuary and a grave.
Yeah. Yeah. The reading about when I can't remember her name, but it was like someone's mom had passed away in the sewer, and they had to take care of the body after her passing. That was that part, and the part with the woman who gave birth. Those were two parts that were a little more difficult to read.
Weren't they? It's so sad.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, well, about that woman who passed away, they call her the grandma, right?
Hmm.
Um, Again, personalities of the people that went down there. There was one fellow by the name of Weiss who was fighting for power with my grandfather. He left his wife and child in the ghetto to die, and he took his mother and a young girl down into the sewer. I mean, can you get a better Hollywood, story than this? There's so much going on. There's really so much going on. Tragic, sad, happy. You have we've got heroes, villains, and a happy ending that you can't get more Hollywood than that.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely when the series is done, it's definitely something that will be that I would like to watch. Um, so one of the things that I want to make sure that we definitely talk about is making sure that that these survivor stories are things that are carried on as we move towards the future. I remember watching like the teacher pulling in the TV with the VHS player with the tapes. I remember watching those in middle school when we were doing like Diary of Anne Frank and we were reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and just having those the stories from the survivors themselves. I think is something that's really important because you need that firsthand memory of what happened. Because reading it from like a third person perspective is one thing, but actually like being immersed in the story from the person's perspective is something that that I think we need to experience so that something like this doesn't happen again. We just need to keep it in the cultural zeitgeist, something that is constantly in the back of our minds. Like this is something that has happened in our past, and not even like a distant past. Like this is a something that happened relatively recently in the in time.
So, we're the last generation that can say, I knew someone who was there,
Mm-hmm.
and soon no one will. So that means memory becomes a choice, right? I mean, that's why publishing my grandfather's memoir was about making sure a witness still has a voice. So that was the sense of duty and responsibility I was talking about. So, I mean, memory without responsibility is just nostalgia.
Yeah.
And it's upon the survivors, the next generation that I'm a 2G, technically, it's second generation. My two boys, Jonathan and Daniel, 32 and 29, are third generation. And I did never really ask them or, demanded of them. This was their choice to get involved in organizations that will that will make sure this story or these stories, all the stories, are never die. They become the witnesses. And as a matter of fact, my mother's part of this incredible project called the Witness Project, and it's a local JCC and the UJA Federation created this project to put high school kids together with survivors, immerse them in their stories. um, for several months. And they put on this production at the very end in a large theater. Maybe about 1,000 or more people show up. So they know their story so well that they actually act it out as best they can. And I think that I talk to these kids and they think this is the best thing they've ever done in their lives. You know, they they love these survivors. They love them as human beings. They love their stories. They love uh, their passion to share the stories, and they love becoming the witnesses. So I think we need to have more and more and more uh, types of programs like that. Of course, within a couple of few years, there aren't going to be any living witnesses. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure these stories don't disappear. And because, like anything else, history can be changed, unfortunately, today with social media, and everything gets warped. And you've got to really keep the history right in order that it doesn't repeat or rhyme.
Yeah, that is something that definitely we don't want any repeats. I just everything that happened during World War II was just, it sounds unbelievable that something like this happened in a time that we had we had cameras, we had radio, like we had all these ways for communication to happen, and something like this was still able to go on for the amount of time that it did. It's just something that you wouldn't think would happen in a modern time period. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to make sure gets said in this conversation, or is there anything any further projects that you want to make sure to highlight? I know we've talked about your mother's book and the upcoming series, some previous movies. Is there anything else in the works?
Well, that keeps me pretty busy.
Yes.
So my focus is really, just now going to events that I can talk about the book, give book talks, podcasts
Yes.
about, and I'm willing to speak to anybody about this who wants to listen, and uh, hopefully this becomes a TV series, and because it should. It really should. I think it makes for an incredible series. And so those are the things that are going to keep me busy. Of course, I also spend time with my mother and I talk to her. And it's not always the easiest thing for her to discuss, because her her childhood was she was robbed of her childhood. It was taken away. Her childhood was trauma. And while I'm always interested in learning more and more and more about her story, I can't learn it from my father anymore because he passed away a couple of years ago. His story is pretty phenomenal too. Um, so I'm going to just turn to his story and just give it a little shout out. Uh, my father I call the Schindler B-list survivor. After because he was really Oskar Schindler helped save my father, but he wasn't in the original story of Schindler's List, and that's a whole nother podcast talking
Yes.
about that, because that's a pretty fascinating story as well. Um, Again, leave everybody with the the idea that you really have to keep these stories going, from generation to generation to generation. It's so important, because otherwise, it disappears. It
Yeah.
becomes memory. And again, memory without responsibility is just nostalgia. And ultimately, it won't be memory. It'll be something, a blurb in the history books, maybe.
Yeah. as time goes on.
And Mark Twain's famous line, history doesn't always repeat, but it often rhymes. So hopefully nothing like that will ever happen. Um, I think that my grandfather wrote, even though he suffered tremendously at the hands of these psychos, he writes, are they humans or are they jackals? He wanted to find some human form in these monsters. Do they exist? And I think that if you actually have people thinking that other human life is like, let's say, a cockroach, right? And you don't look at them as human beings anymore. You look at these disgusting creatures. You can take a life because you've been programmed to do that. If you don't look at other human beings the way they should be looked at.
Yeah.
So that's all I got.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling everyone your grandfather's story, some of your mother's story. I'm just so grateful to have had you on today.
I'm honored to be on your show.
Yeah, so thank you again.
And Beneath the Lightless Sky
yes.
by Ignacy Chiger, and The Girl in the Green Sweater by Christina Chiger.
All right. Well, thank you again. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Madison. All right.
And that's where I'll end it for the show.
Okay.
Do you have any questions before we go?
So do you go back and edit the?
Yep, I'll go through and edit. Most of it would just be taking out any longer pauses. I usually take out a lot of my own ums. I usually read from a script when I do my standalone episodes. So coming up with things to say off the brain, I come up with a lot of ums. So I take out those for myself. And these end pieces I'll take up, but it'll stay. I'd say probably 97%. However, we just went with it.
Right. I mean, I did have some talking points that I had in front of me, but just to jar my memory. But I think that I've gone over this so many times that when I read this, when I talk about it, it's like I'm actually having a conversation across time with him. I should have said that.
I can see if I can piece that in somewhere.
Okay.
No, you I didn't usually I converse more, but the way that the conversation was going, I felt like it was appropriate just to keep letting you tell the story. I think
there's so much of the story to tell.
To go. Yeah. All right. I will edit it and have it ready for tomorrow. That's it's going to be my episode for this week, and I can send you guys a link to the
yes, please. That'd be great. Yes.
All right.
That'd be awesome. I'll put it on my socials.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, if you don't have anything else, I think we're.
So you can find me at Beneath the Lightless Sky.
Perfect. Okay.
My Instagram.
All right, cool. And I will make sure to tag you in any posts that I do for the episode.
Great. Awesome. Follow. It's all good for the algorithms. Love it.
Yes, they do.
All right, Madison. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Bye-bye. You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you again to Doron for coming on the show and sharing his family's story of survival. You can find Doron online at Beneath the Lightless Sky on Instagram. I will also include a link to the book below. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me over on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.